Hi, welcome to the Handmaid's Tale panel for the Apocalypse Rising track for Virtual Dragon Con 2020. My name is Morgan A. McLaughlin McFarland. I am a writer. I own Salt Circle Games, which is a role-playing game company currently publishing Chill 3rd Edition, and I also teach about writing apocalypses online. So let's just go around and introduce everybody else. So Sue, do you want to take it away?
Sure. My name is Sue Kissenweather. I am a blogger and podcaster for Women at Warp. We are a feminist Star Trek podcast on the Roddenberry Podcast Network. And if you'd like to find out more, head to womenatwarp.com or follow us on any social media platform at Women at Warp.
Brandy?
Hi, I'm Brandy Blanton. In the real adult world, I work in research and event monitoring for a major financial institution. In my free time, I'm a cosplayer. You can find me online at Madam Section Cosplay. My background is in academia, where I have a master's degree in terrorism, which is what brings me to The Handmaid's Tale. I'm really interested in the intersection between religious terrorism and totalitarianism and The Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, so that's me.
Right. And Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Ehler. My academic background is in political science and gender studies, and also by day I work in research, market research, and among other things in my free time, I am politically and socially active and have participated in a lot of different kinds of protest and activist events over the years. So that's something that I've always brought that kind of mindfulness to my readings of both the show and the books in the Gilead world.
And just as a heads up, we will be discussing both The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments. So here there be spoilers. If you have not yet read the Testaments, just be aware of that going into the panel that we will be discussing both of the books. All right. Anybody want to get us rolling?
I mean, I have so many thoughts on the Testaments. I read it pretty much when it came out, so I've been waiting almost a year to talk about it. And I guess, like, just to start off, did anyone who read it have a favorite piece of additional world building that we learned about the Gilead world? Because I know that I read Handmaid's Tale when I was in high school, which was over a decade ago now. But like so many of us have waited so many years to learn more about this book, or about the world in that book.
For me, it was the Pearl Girls. The missionaries that they were sending out, because it felt both incredibly true and incredibly insidious. And I know that Margaret Atwood has said that she wasn't going to put anything into the books that wasn't something that happens or has happened in real life. And so to me, that was very, very easy to equate with, I mean, both the door-to-door proselytizing that happens. Of course, living in the South, we get a lot of people coming door to door trying to sell us on various religions, but also on, international missionary work and how insidious it can be, and the promises that get made and what you actually get in exchange for signing up. So to me, that was something, seeing that they were willingly sending these girls out into the big, dangerous, sinful world with this mission of luring other people in, was such an interesting piece of world building for me.
Yeah, I thought
the Pearl Girls were interesting, but another thing that was interesting for me was the sort of building of the international relations in it. We also got to see how some of the other countries were responding. So not only were they accepting the Pearl Girl missionaries, a lot of them weren't trying to put the United States government back into power, which is something that we've seen in the show, but there was no sort of mentioning in the original book as to how those other countries were responding. So that to me was something that was really interesting.
The thing about the Pearl Girls that really struck me is that, I don't know about anybody else, but I have definitely been approached by women asking if I have heard about God the Mother, or about the female vision of God in the Bible.
Mm.
And that is a trafficking ring.
Wow.
They go and they approach young women who typically are alone and try to get them to go with them. Like, that is a very real thing that, like, it's especially striking right when something happens in the Gilead stories that is part of your experience in life, which, whew. But the thing that I find most interesting really with any story, not just Gilead, is how that world came to be, right? Because in The Handmaid's Tale, we're in it. We're early in it, but we don't get a lot of the formation of Gilead. Mm-hmm. And we got some from the show, but I was sort of fascinated by Aunt Lydia's tale of, we sat down and we figured this out and we came up with these rules. And that was, I still want more of that. Like, I want Serena Joy's story from that time period, right? I am sort of fascinated with characters who I think we would describe as acting against their own interests, mm-hmm. as a group, maybe, in order to get individual power.
They're codifying their own oppression.
Yes.
Although, so yeah, that part was very interesting to me. And that's something that I really want to dig into. So I'll just say that, like, one thing that I found really interesting about the additional world building was, like, as they transitioned from the first generation into, now we have to make up these new rituals for what happens when these children that we've stolen, or the children of Gilead, get married. And like the spring green colors that they're given, and those new rules that what's interesting is they're pitched to Agatha as, like, this is just how it's done in Gilead. But if you look at it from the historical perspective, or for Lydia's perspective, they're making it up for that generation. But going back to that council of women, of aunts, who sat down and wrote these rules, that was one of the most fascinating parts of the book for me, to really think about how many of them seem to be coming from different perspectives, and on a micro level, they were working towards their own personal interests of either survival or grabbing at the available power, and maybe a little bit of actual piety. But it was definitely really interesting to see that the way that most of them were manipulated into accepting that role of then taking on the responsibility of creating the oppression.
And it's very much a survival technique, because if you don't have a hand in writing in the rules, then you have no way of providing any kind of protection for yourself or mm-hmm. for any of the other women. And I think that just having the foot in the door, I mean, I think that they knew that they were doing something that was morally and ethically reprehensible, both, on a wide scale and to many of them individually. But I think that it was a cost and a personal amount of guilt that they were willing to carry in order to allow some freedoms for some women, as opposed to no freedoms at all for any women, and make sure that repository of knowledge didn't get lost. If you didn't have the aunts keeping the books and the library, by this point in the story, you would have no literate women in Gilead. You would have lost that entirely. Go ahead, Brandy.
The idea of, like, freedom for, you're battling for freedom for some women. I'm thinking of the point in the book where Aunt Lydia specifically asks to keep the eyes and to keep the men out of the women's business, where she grabs for that piece of power, and the other women are like, clutches pearls, like, how could you dare do that? Because she went for that piece of power that she knew that they didn't even think about doing that. Mm-hmm. So even though, they're limiting themselves, they're trying to, maybe claw at what they can get back.
So there were two things that I found really interesting about Lydia's narrative, about, like, seeing this side of her that she's like, I I was playing a long game the whole time. It was always my plan to, I've been working on this for decades, but I finally brought Gilead down. And, the first thing that I was just incredibly mindful of as I was reading this book is this is Lydia narrating it. We're not getting an outside perspective saying this is what Lydia did.
Yeah.
And she knows that she is going to be one of the few records. So yeah, in some ways, she advocated, she said, we need to keep the men out. We need to, like the aunts still need to be able to read and write. We need to set up the system, but she's also the one keeping this record. And so was she the person in the room who advocated for that? Or was that Aunt Helena or Aunt Elizabeth? And when she says, I was playing the long game the whole time, were you, or did you see the end coming? And then you knew like what pieces you had in place that you could make this happen. I mean, I'm frustrated with Lydia in this book on a lot of levels. We start the book with having a statue erected in her honor. And at the end, there's a statue that some people think may have been in her honor. And, on the one hand, we could say, yes, if you're forced to work within the system, then like try to do everything you can to rebel and like take back the pieces of power that you can. But on the other hand, I see someone who had a lot of control over young people and who was one of the few people who had control over a narrative that history, would as history was recreated, because all history is just pieced together. And she was savvy enough to know that that's how it would work.
She was also, as she says multiple times, closer to the end of her life.
Mm-hmm.
So if she saw this coming and had been, secreting away these documents for a just in case moment, I mean, this is the time, if you suspect you're going to die soon anyway, that you're going to write the narrative that paints you in the best light possible.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I definitely think we are dealing with a case of a potentially unreliable narrator. But at the same time, I also think that she doesn't really have at this stage in the game anything to lose. And so being as upfront about how it went, I mean, I feel like she, while she does try to paint herself as, yes, I've always sort of been secretly, I'm a freedom fighter in my heart. Like, I think she's pretty on the level about some of the atrocities that she's committed in the, in the name of trying to make everything appear to be happening the way that they expect it to happen.
Well, right. I guess go ahead.
Sorry. I think we're giving her even more credit than she gives herself, right? She never says she's a freedom fighter. She says that she wants to get them back.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this could not even necessarily be about, bringing down Gilead because it's the right thing to do. It could be about personal vengeance, and it just so happens to have this effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that particular storyline it raised the question for me that, she was definitely, I believe that she was put into that horrific situation and that they, that they tortured her in order to psychologically manipulate her in the way that they did. And I believe that she acted out of survival and that she did take some clever steps.
I mean, what else do you do in that situation?
Well, I guess
if your other choice is you become an unwoman and
I guess like
what is your choice then?
That was the question that I was asking is like, if you are in this is what I was asking myself is when you're put in that situation, your choice ends up becoming Do I decide that I am going to choose survival and I'm going to try my best to think through how I can help the most people, but at the same time, I will be complicit in this oppression and like in some cases straight up physical torture of, you know, I mean, and in many cases
That's
with the handmaid. Do you like, that's a choice that you have to make is, am I going to choose that? Or am I going to say, no, I refuse to participate in what you're forcing me to do? Because like at the end of the day, the way that repressive regimes like that succeed is that the human nature is like so strong to survive that people are, you know, willing to take on those tasks. It's a lot of Aunt Lydias that are contributing to those regimes existing, instead of everyone just, you know, saying no. Like what they put those women through in that stadium would not have been a successful tactic, and Gilead would not have been able to, like, they would not have been able to have the handmaids and like create the kind of controlling society that they wanted if they had had no women willing to like participate at all.
It's like that quote, nice people make the best Nazis. It's not the ones necessarily who are, you know, going out to actively do the wrong things. It's the one who are just like, well, I'm not going to rock the boat. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll just go along with this. This is how the world works now.
Yeah. Yeah. So this book, I mean, like I said, I've loved Handmaid's Tale for many years, and that's a book that, especially when I read it when I was younger, made me think about like watching the actions of others and like watching what I'm willing to put up with in the actions of others. And this book really made me consider my own, like watching my own actions and responses to things. And obviously I have never been put in the kinds of situations that Lydia was put in.
I think it also can be a little bit difficult not to conflate the Aunt Lydia that we've seen in the show with the Aunt Lydia of the books. Because for me, I read the book and then I had a very long period of time without rereading the book. And then I watched the show and then I read the Testaments. And so it's difficult because I feel like her narrative in the show is quite different from what's been filled in in the books. And so I think a comparison between the backstories is quite interesting. And I wonder, you know, how much did they have a conversation with Margaret Atwood when they were working on the episode that focused on her backstory? Because it's difficult to look at that and wonder how that would slot into the life of the literary version of the character, if at all, because we don't get a lot of information on Aunt Lydia's life, like what she was doing sort of in her day-to-day life throughout her younger years.
Yeah. Although I believe she's a judge, right? In the book.
Yeah.
She's not a teacher.
Yes.
Yeah. Atwood did make a point of adding in, she left law for 2 years to be a teacher.
Oh,
and then
I
came
missed
back
that
to
entirely.
It.
I completely
it's like
missed that.
a sentence. It flies by, but it's there to make it fit with the
interesting book. Because she definitely, the way that she paints herself in her testaments is that she was completely like against this movement and unwilling, an unwilling participant. And it wasn't until she was completely broken down and saw no other option that did she then decide, okay, I'm going to survive and figure out like a long-term way of bringing this down. But yeah, in the show, in that backstory episode, you see that she definitely has like moral ideas.
She's a spiteful woman.
Motherhood and she's spiteful. And yeah, I think that in the show, or in the books, we do not see the direct forms of physical torture that we see the show version of Lydia participate in and instigate. Although I still think that like what she has built just out of like the handmaids and keeping them like maintaining that system is terrible enough in itself.
Something that I want to bring up is that when I read the book when it first came out, I was just coming off, watching the episodes of the show. And the way that I view the book coming off the show is completely different than the way I came off the book rereading it once we, found out we were doing this panel. The way I viewed Aunt Lydia in both readings was completely different. So I definitely think that, it's good that we're discussing this. Because one thing that we do want to bring up, we've talked about how we don't see that same torture that we see in the show in the books. But we've talked about the fact that maybe she's not telling us this in the books because she's the one telling us the story. Yeah. So that's something, to consider. If I was Aunt Lydia and I was writing it down, I don't think I'd mention that, I pulled Janine's eyes out, like that's not something I'm going to mention.
Just the one eye, just the one eye.
But it definitely, just the one eye, not both of them, but just the one. But I don't know, but it definitely changed the way I viewed the book. Because when I read it the first time, I was like, oh, this seems like an apology letter for Aunt Lydia. And I don't know how I feel about that. But when I came straight off listening to The Handmaid's Tale and then listening to this, I was like, okay, well, that's a little bit different. But it definitely doesn't jive with the Aunt Lydia version from the show.
I also think there's a degree to which that the show does have a tendency to wander into torture porn territory. I think far more extreme than the versions were presented, even from Offred, even in the Handmaid's Tale book.
Yeah.
Just that the actuality of it is much, much more graphic, because I think it's meant to titillate, whereas I think in Offred's case, she's just being very matter of fact. This is what happens to us. This is how it is. This is what life is like. So I think that there's a difference in the approach. So, I mean, it may very well be just as bad in the books, but I think that there's not a focus on the nitty gritty of the details of the torture as often, because that's not the same type of narrative that they're trying to tell, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I would definitely say book Aunt Lydia is a much more empathetic character than show Aunt Lydia. No sadness or sympathy in my heart for Aunt Lydia of the show. Any chance that she might have had there, she's blown that one.
If we could jump off of Aunt Lydia, that sounded wrong for a second. I divert from Aunt Lydia. There we go. I'd love to talk about Becca and Agnes and how they are basically raised in very similar situations in the same like ultra conservative totalitarian Christian right, I guess we'll have to say. But Becca, when she learns to read, reads the scriptures that her culture is supposedly based on for herself and draws her own conclusions, whereas Agnes continues to follow the rules and believe whatever she's told. And again, from my own experience being raised in a very conservative Christian household as a kid, like those are the two main paths I saw, my colleagues, my friends take as well. And it rang very true to me to see those two girls react in such different ways to the ability to gain additional knowledge.
So I read Becca as queer for like the entire book, and we never get a confirmation of that. I was really, when they kind of had the time jump and Agnes was like, we've been living together and we've become so close, I was really expecting for there to like eventually be a reveal.
I don't think Becca has the language for it.
No, right? I don't.
So how
I don't
can there
think
be
she
a
does.
reveal?
But it did make me wonder, like after reading the entire book and knowing how it all plays out, if that plus the trauma that she experienced with her father contributed to just like pushing her over the edge of I need to of like creating the questions in her minds of like, this just does not sit right with me. Whereas Agnes like didn't have those same pressures necessarily. I mean, I also, honestly, I will often just read characters as queer. So, I mean, maybe that was just me, that both of them, I just really thought that they were going to end up as a couple.
No, I really do have to agree that I thought throughout the book that that was what that relationship between the two of them was building towards, was that they had found this place where they could have something like a relationship between the two of them that could develop, and they'd have the safety and security of, you know, of being among the ants to sort of provide that network. And
And I'm not as, I wish I had the historical background to like definitely say so, but you know, my suspicion is that there have been periods of time where like religious all-female like safe havens like that have been a place that like queer women can exist, you know, like away from the male gaze, basically.
well, I mean, the very fact that the only way to get out of a marriage is to say, "Oh, I know, I feel called to God. I feel called. God wants me to go do this job," and that's the only way out of it. I think it stands to reason that that would be a really good and powerful out for queer women, or, you know, queer femme identified people.
So I also read Becca as queer, but more so than Agnes, although I can see it. But I think that, you know, in this discussion, we need to acknowledge that the narrative of trauma causing someone to be queer is problematic and harmful.
No, I am not.
I'm not saying you implied that, but I want to make it clear for anybody who's watching.
Yeah.
That trauma does not cause someone to be queer.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. But to clarify what I was saying that the fact that she was already a queer person, like already would be given, because like I think that I have experienced this in my own life, is like when you're just like presented, you know, with like such an oppressive heterosexual society, that it makes you more likely to question, because you're like, but there's something in me that is not squaring with this. And so I think that she was already predisposed to be a questioning person because of that. And she separately from that experienced the trauma of a male authority figure injuring her in like, and making her feel distrustful of, it sounds like, all male authority figures, which especially in Gilead, I can see, you know, again, would give her another reason just to like question the entire structure she's been raised in.
I mean, you have to assume there are many wives in Gilead who are probably queer and who have just had to repress that and be willing to suffer through a relationship that they didn't want to be in. It's not like they had any choice to begin with. But I think if you add the additional layer of trauma, I think there's an expectation of you're going to suffer through the marriage no matter what you feel about it. But with her additional level of trauma, I think it gave her that almost the freedom to be like, no, I'm disengaging from this entire process. So I don't think that it is so much a matter of the trauma informing the queerness so much as the trauma sort of giving her a door that she can walk through, so she can be in a world where she does not have to completely, you know, subsume that queer identity, you know, to, you know, the role of a wife and mother in Gilead.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue, for making sure we clarified that.
I would like to talk a little bit about sort of the rampant slut shaming that happens among the children, talking about those kids who were born to handmaidens, the way that those children are treated, and the way that those women, even though they're supposed to be this, like, you know, the holy bearers, the vessels of the children, and how they are spoken about so despicably by the children, some of whom were carried by handmaidens themselves.
They're not supposed to know, right? And they all find out because the Marthas are talking to the wives, and it's this rumor mill, right? Which is how a lot of terrible things start.
I mean, I think that, well, also, I mean, we do see like multiple divergent things in the world building from the show and the book. And I know that in the show, they, you know, they decided to have like the Handmaid's program be race blind because like they're so desperate for babies, whereas there's like this whole race element that's in the book piece that was taken out for the show. But even with that, you know, like I feel like a child can tell often if they look like their mother or not. And like if they're aware that handmaids are a thing that exists in their society, then I think that it would be pretty easy for them to figure out.
But it just goes to show that even, you know, even in a world where, I mean, you have obviously like the virgin whore dichotomy is like so incredibly strong, but even in a world where like you have codified this and you've made these women like we have all these rituals surrounding it to make sure that it's done like exactly in the right way, and no, it's completely divine, and yet we're still going to talk ill of them. They're like just these slutty vessels. And
Right.
Well, it brings up the question of where are they hearing it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if would the wives be speaking that way? Do they not actually consider their children theirs if born of a handmaid? Is it the Marthas who are spreading this? Like where are these ideas coming from, and how are they getting to these children? Like how did children in Gilead even know the word slut?
I think that if a culture is to its foundation built on misogyny, then, you know, you can paper over it with all of this rhetoric about like respecting the vessel, but you're not going to be able to root out those like very basic misogynistic concepts.
And even if you love the child and consider the child yours, you may not ever be able to get right with the process of how the child got there, because it's, you know, it's not a happy, good, fun time for the wives who, you know, again, they are, you know, part and parcel of, you know, this self-oppressive system. But especially by the time you get to later in the Testaments, we're on how many generations in at this point? A lot of these wives haven't been raised to know anything else. It's not like the first group of wives who had an independent life prior to Gilead. Right. Many of the mothers of these children, they don't have any experience with the world outside of that. They probably don't like it. They just have to live with it. They may be grateful for the babies, but they certainly may not be grateful for how the babies get there.
Well, I think we can safely assume, because she was alive when Gilead took over, that Agnes is of the first generation to be raised in Gilead, even if not born in Gilead. So if, you know, we see her at what, 16, something like that, and then 9 years pass, we're only maybe 2 generations in. So it's a little surprising that a former life, a former culture, or a former structure can disappear so quickly. Because, I mean, we're talking shortened generations because these children are getting married at 14, 15, 16.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I was kind of reading the timeline of Gilead as a whole as like around 20 years, maybe. I mean, maybe a little bit longer than that. But, you know, baby Nicole is like 15 or 16 in the book. And like by the time everything kind of catches up to each other. And so, and, you know, Aunt Lydia like talks about how if she's related to Agnes, then like it means that like Gilead can't have existed for more than like maybe 30 years.
But I think that's some of these guys are on their second or third child bride though. So some of these children are being raised by mothers who are 12, 14, 16 years tops older than them.
Right. Because they're being systematically murdered by their husbands. Yeah, I did want to, just since we like mentioned Baby Nicole, I did want to mention that what I found really interesting about her and Daisy, except for showing us that outside world perspective, which I did find really interesting, and like the normalizing of relations with some countries and like the backlash. But other than that, like outside perspective, I was the least engaged with Daisy's chapters. And, but I did find it just interesting that her name is Baby Nicole. And it just really made me wonder, like, is this Atwood referencing the show, or is the show, like, did she tell the show, you need to put this in here? And what I find particularly interesting about that is even though she is creating things that make the two storylines somewhat divergent, she also like kept peppering in these things like naming Agnes Agnes. And she just like kept like putting in these things that would bring the two together. And it's really rare, I think, to see like the original media being concurrently released with like a remake of it. And so that was just like very fascinating to me. And really, I just really wanted to know like who was, who was influencing who, and her own thought process of like, very like, very directly referencing the show, or making sure that the show was directly referencing the testaments.
Honestly,
it seemed to me like a really strange. It seemed like a really strange sort of tie-in to the television show, and it also seemed like it was specifically written to be published right at the end of this season that just ended, where Nicole's in Canada. They've both just been arrested. It seemed like it was written to be published right now in the television show. So I would love to hear from someone who's just read the two books and not seen the show, and see how they feel about it. Because I felt like there were things in here that maybe wouldn't make sense if you hadn't seen the show. Because it definitely, I talked about it a little bit already, but it definitely colored my first reading of the book. The show did.
So my mom has not seen the show. She says the book was too upsetting. She's like, I lived through the 70s. I lived through that previous wave of the reproductive rights movement. I don't want to have to see a show about what would have happened if things went wrong. So she has only read the books, and she didn't have any problems following any of the details or connections. She didn't feel like she was missing anything. But yeah, she's like, I don't need to see it. It's bad enough to read it and to know that it could happen. I don't need to actually watch these things happen to somebody.
Yeah.
But no, she didn't have any problems with it at all. She said it felt very natural where it picked up from where it had been before, and it filled in for her a lot of the holes. But even if you look at the cover art, if you look at the original Handmaid's Tale cover art, the shape of the winged hat compared to the shape of the hat on the Testaments, it now has the curve to it rather than the flip, because it's almost like the little Dutch girl hat style back on the original cover art. So seeing even the visual change in it, and I thought the color choice of the cover was a really good choice to go with that bright green, the spring green.
Yeah.
Because red is so heavily associated with the show visually, like from reading and in the books and the show from reading, it's to have a different color in there was like, okay, this is going to be an extremely different experience.
Although I will say I interpreted the figure that's on that front cover, which are you willing to hold it up again just so we can look at it?
Yep.
So I don't know if that's supposed to be a handmaid. I think that that's either supposed to be a Pearl Girl or like an aunt in training. And like I interpreted that is Agnes and the back is Daisy. And just like for anyone watching who hasn't like really looked at the cover design, it's really cool. within that image of who I interpret to be Agnes, there's like a shadow image of the girl with the ponytail. And yeah, and then on the back, the image of Daisy has in her ponytail an image with the person in the bonnet. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is where having the ebook is a downside, because I don't think I actually saw the back cover.
Yeah, I was so excited for this book, and like I was like, I have to get the hardcover of it. And I noticed the front one on my own. I actually had to have the back one pointed out to me. But I love that art, and the fact that it's like the sisters, although they were separated, were always, you know, together in some ways and influencing each other. I did find Lydia's plan of bringing Nicole back and like using her as the courier, that piece of the plan seemed completely unnecessary. It was just like, let's have some plot mechanics.
That almost seems like if it goes wrong, it still goes right for her, like playing both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so again when I say
she
like
can't get the documents back out.
I think she's played both sides from the very beginning, and her long game, you know, her long game is no matter how it shakes out, like I'm going to be on the winning side.
Yeah, and I mean that's another reason that I'm just so distrustful of her narrative of like, you know, of that I am helping, because the way that she constructed that is she reunited that family, and she made a point of like making it clear to them that they are sisters. And so in knowing that if this succeeds and Gilead does come down, then, you know, my testaments are going to be released. And also like the people who know what I did are going to think of me in that heroic way. And it's these two young women that, you know, Daisy / Nicole feels like, you've given me the family that I was torn apart from and was always missing my whole life. And Agnes feels like Aunt Lydia has always been there for me in my time of need. You know, she saved me from marriage. She saved Becca from marriage. And now she's giving me my family back, and she's helping me escape this repressive place. And it just like, I guess I was really upset by that statue dedication at the end, because I was just like, no, she's manipulated you so much. You wouldn't have been taken away from your family, Nicole. Like you wouldn't even exist in the way that you exist if it weren't for Lydia and her comrades.
Yeah, but I mean, they only know their experiences with her.
Right.
And the people, supposedly the Mayday in Canada, only knows that she was their informant.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's what history gets preserved, right?
Yeah. So big takeaway, everyone, just like whenever you can, keep a diary that paints yourself in the best light possible. Because
time to break out the old live journal again. Make sure
Yeah, but also on Twitter, like remember, those are the archives that are going to paint your future for the future conferences.
But yeah, speaking of the future conferences, that's like, can we talk about the two epilogues and how they sort of fit together and don't fit together?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I love that I have the like the Audible Claire Danes version of Handmaid's Tale, and I love that they added in that like additional Q&A portion of the epilogue to basically promote the testaments, being like some additional documents are going to be coming out soon. Yeah, I thought it is interesting. Yeah, I do want to talk about those conferences and how they do and don't fit together. I liked that the guy apologized for his comments from the previous conference,
but not before making more.
I know,
right? So because we're on the internet, I might as well point out there are two really great articles on Bustle. That one from before the publication of the Testaments that analyzes the epilogue of Handmaid's Tale, and then one after the Testaments that comes back and talks about the epilogue of the Testaments. So I highly recommend looking those up. But like, the Handmaid's Tale is basically telling us that even after all, or the epilogue of Handmaid's Tale, even after all that Offred went through, her story is still being filtered through the two male professors who found her tapes, right? And they're calling her unreliable, and they're making misogynistic jokes like the Underground Railroad. And, you know, they're saying that if only she'd told us something important about Gilead instead of just focusing on her own story. And I mean, it shows us that things might be getting better. We're seeing women in academia, we're seeing women running symposiums, but they certainly have not dismantled the patriarchy, right? And in the Testaments, it's just the next year that they're back at this conference. Yeah. And it's interesting to see a little bit how Professor Piexoto has changed, but also not changed. And he seems to have, at least in my reading of it, he seems to have more respect for Aunt Lydia because of the types of documents she preserved, because they were the types of documents that he wanted to see from Offred.
Yeah.
You know, let's not put any sort of unreasonable expectations on somebody who is literally a sex slave. You know, right. If only you could have kept a really nice written journal, because that was definitely a thing that you were able to do. That would have been so great. If you could have like maybe gotten some photographs of people so we'd know exactly which guy you were talking about. Yeah, that would have been useful. But so Christina, I know you mentioned that of the narratives, the one that you felt really sort of the least invested in or the least connected to was Daisy's, was Baby Nicole's. So I kind of like to take a moment to talk about Baby Nicole and the experience of being a 15-year-old girl and discovering that you are the literal poster child of stolen children of Gilead taken by the horrible heathens, and to be like, oh no, I've always hated her and she's me. I've been hating me the whole time. Like, what a terrible, terrible reveal for her to find out that she was the hated, loathed Baby Nicole.
Almost like a spin on the Chosen One novel. Like, instead of wanting to be the thing, you don't want to be the thing.
God, nobody wants to be Baby Nicole. I mean, and first of all, being 15 years old and still being referred to as Baby Nicole. And how, you know, the awareness that if she goes into this society, she is only going to be called Baby Nicole.
Right.
For the rest of her life. That is it. She will be Baby Nicole on her deathbed. Oh, poor Baby Nicole.
Yeah. Yeah. And like married,
That the thing they immediately want to do is marry her off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To a commander who's killed, three?
So many.
Young wives?
Yeah.
Although that's something we haven't really brought up, is that maybe I'm just forgetting from my last reading of Handmaid's Tale, but like the pedophilia that runs rampant in Gilead is much more clear to me in the Testaments than it was in the Handmaid's Tale.
I mean, we didn't really encounter like interactions with children in Handmaid's Tale. And hi, Kat.
It happens, sorry.
So I can see how like she didn't really have the perspective to show us that, and that may be part of why she wanted to tell this story from Agnes starting at the age that she did.
But I mean, marrying girls off as young as 12 or 13 is something that happens even now in fundamentalist religious. I mean, in our country, in the United States, there are quite a few states where it is legal to get married at 12 if you have parental permission or you were pregnant, which means that girls get married off to their abusers, to their molesters, with some degree of regularity in those states, because once you're married, they will not then go back and prosecute you for child molestation.
Yeah.
So that is the way that these groups get around being prosecuted. Oh, well, he molested her. Well, now he's married to her. You can't molest your wife. It's fine now.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I like that. So my husband is a crimes against children investigator for our county. So he deals a lot with this topic in particular, and he does a lot of work with child trafficking. He's on a federal child sex trafficking task force. So we get a lot of interesting materials that come through on that topic. And the two groups that are the most difficult to deal with when it comes to investigating crimes of that nature are extreme fundamentalist religious groups, or like within a prostitution ring itself, how the older women will often kind of close ranks in order to protect the pimp or pimps from being prosecuted. So
yeah. Although I did think it was interesting that in the case of Becca's father, I think that Lydia viewed that as like a time when the system, when she was able to like use the system to like truly serve justice.
Yeah.
And I mean, feel free to push back on this if you had a different reading of the situation, but it seemed like from Lydia's perspective, in that case, she was like, you know, these things happened before Gilead. But now, because of the way we have, we've set up this society, I can set it up so that he is beaten to death by women, and like truly get a level of justice that, you know, would not necessarily be meted out in the United States.
But that's predicated on being caught. And how much harder is it to catch them at it when everyone is afraid to be the person who talks, who confesses it? Because
right.
If they don't believe you, if they don't take you seriously, you're the one who's going to be, you know, beaten, executed, you know, enslaved, banished. So
you know what? Those are the same fears we have now. Not necessarily the beaten, executed, but so many assaults and so many rapes go unreported because people are afraid of the perpetrator, because they're afraid they won't be believed, because they're afraid that they're the ones who are going to have their names and their reputations raked through the mud.
And in a society where women have almost no recourse at all, they can't put together a paper trail, they can't document what's happening to them, I think it's that much harder. And it might make Lydia feel better to feel like, oh, I've saved one in this case. But I think systemically, it's probably much more rampant, because there are people who would have fail-safes of other family members who would report, teachers who would report, doctors who would report, who aren't going to do that in the system of Gilead.
Right. And she also, you know, like she's giving herself a pat on the back for punishing Becca's father. But at the same time, she's helping this commander marry these young women and then murder them. And she's helped him perpetuate that cycle time and again.
And if one is doing that, it really makes you wonder how many other commanders are on wives number 2 or number 3, because the old one just wasn't young and hot and fresh anymore. You know, how many women are dying from tragic, untreatable, sudden illnesses because, you know, women are so weak.
There seems to be a lot of sickly women in Gilead.
Yeah. Yep. Happened in Agnes's household. And I think that it also creates the further division between the wives and the handmaids, and like that underlying structure of disdain for the handmaids, because the wives feel already expendable and their fear is here, like there's constantly someone waiting in the wings to replace me. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh. We have about 3 minutes left. So is there anything that we didn't touch on that anybody wants to bring up?
I guess I wonder what kind of treatment for long-term trauma are these girls coming out of Gilead going to have to, like, what's it going to take to ever create something that is a new, safe, normal for them, having lived their entire lives in this totalitarian, patriarchal society? You know, are they ever going to be able to trust men? Are they ever going to be able to even trust each other, because there's such a system of spying and reporting on each other. How do you ever, I feel hopeful, obviously, about the direction it goes at the end of the story, but with the individual girls and women, how do you ever bounce back from that? How do you recover from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as we've said multiple times, like these, even though these are dystopian books, they reflect things that happen in our own world. And there are certainly many people who either escape oppressive regimes or, see the end of them and then figure out how to be resilient, or sometimes, are not able to move forward. And I think that I wish that we as a society were more focused on providing people with the services they need to move forward.
I think
And
a
a
lot
place
of
to
them,
move
in order to
forward.
move forward, I think a lot of them, in order to move forward, will have to step away completely from religion, because that's what a lot of people end up needing to do when they come out of abusive relationships with religious cults and that sort of thing, along with needing those resources, those therapeutic resources.
And seeing some kind of justice, some kind of restorative justice for the things they've lost, the lives that they've lost, I think is going to be a necessary component if you have this entire society of women who are now going to try to step out of this darkness and back into something like a real normal human life again.
Yeah, there's so much to this world that we could still explore, because all of the stories that we get in the books anyway are from the perspectives of just a few people, and we only see glimpses of Mayday and the rehabilitation projects. So I think there's so much more that we could expand upon in this world. But I'm gonna wrap up my thoughts with, please make sure that you are registered to vote, and vote this November.
Yes, please
in
do.
most places, you can just go ahead and order your ballot.
Yep.
Just go ahead and do
Probably
it right now.
Yeah. In Georgia, you can order your ballot online. You no longer have to go through the process of taking the picture and send it in. You can register for your ballot online, have it be sent to your home. Please, please do that. Find a ballot drop-off box near you that you can take it. Almost every public library is going to have one. And make sure that the other people in your life are able to get their ballots out as well. Let's quickly go around. Tell me where you can find, where we can find you on social media. Christina, where can we find you on social media?
Most places, I'm Tina_N_Pen, and especially on Twitter, where I occasionally tell you about letters you should write to your representatives.
Brandy?
Madam Secretary General Cosplay on Instagram. You can find me. I've been on a little bit of a hiatus because of coronavirus and work, but if you message me, I will answer you.
Awesome. Sue?
I'm on Twitter at Spaltor, that's SPALTOR, or you can find me through @WomenAtWarp.
Okay. And you can find me at raving_liberal at almost any social media platform that you can think of. You can also find me on Patreon at Chill RPG. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.